So, my name is Dawn Bornheimer, and I am a mentor, a leader, and I work in the mental health space. My goal is always to uplift others, to amplify their voice, and to find ways to lead from any seat.
First, I'd like to ask you, what do you think people's first impression of you is?
I hope people's first impression is that I have positive energy and that I come across as a very kind soul. It's certainly my intention.
Awesome. So, you talked about working in the mental health space and having goals of empowering people. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you end up where you are?
Yeah, so I've been undergrad in clinical psychology and I did master's work at Johns Hopkins. I started my career working with children that experienced trauma. And as I progressed through that work over the course of several years, I saw a very common thread in that the education system was not prepared to receive these children. The average teacher didn't have the background required to support a child that may be in psychological distress or having some type of traumatic response. And so I sought out a program that I could go into the classroom, and I was able to do some graduate work at Johns Hopkins, which afforded me the opportunity to teach in Baltimore City public schools. I did that for 5 years, and as I evolved through my career, I moved into working at Kaplan and doing some work in tutoring and running learning centers, staying really connected to education, but kind of shifting to the business side. And I always felt this pull to come back to working with these at promise students, more vulnerable populations. And in March of 2019, I was offered that opportunity. I work for a health simulation company that uses the power of conversation to empower individuals to shift their behavior around leading conversations in the education space. And so I'm so very grateful for the work that I do today, especially during this pandemic. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, to help empower individuals to have these conversations, to not look away, to lean in, and to truly understand how to be better humans to other humans.
I love that. That's extremely respectable and important. I am always talking about how it starts with empowering our kids. I don't have any kids, so I don't mean mine personally, but the youth of today is the future of tomorrow. And if we empower them and explain to them that they have the tools and the skills and the power to be whatever it is they want to be, I believe they can be anything that they want to
Mhm.
be. So you talk about working with kids with childhood traumas. Is there anything in your past that has driven you to where you are? Is there things that you saw or maybe something you experienced that has led you down the road you are on?
Yeah, so I did grow up around some adverse childhood experiences. My parents were twice were divorced at a very young age, and I think they both did the best they could with the information they had at the time. But they didn't have very good coping strategies. They often took their stress out on one another. There was a lot of arguing and fighting. There was some different adversities in those early years, and I just remember wondering if that existed in other people's homes, right? If there was this different life that existed outside of my house, or if somehow, other people were moving through similar challenges. And as I grew up, I was an empath. I've always been very connected to protecting the bully or protecting the child being bullied, right? I always was very curious about why people treat people the way that they do, and or being the one who is always going to protect the individual that felt a little bit left out or didn't have access to the same resources. And I moved through my adult life in that same way. I think that I have a big heart and a lot of compassion for people that are navigating different challenges, understanding that we only know a fraction of what people are going through. And in order for people to fully show up for themselves, they have to have access to that safety, right? That psychological safety that comes from the human connection. And so I'm so drawn to that work, and also look to seek that connection with others. And that's why I love what you do, and this idea that when we give people the opportunity to share their stories, not only does that story become a tool in someone else's toolkit, it allows people to feel connected in a way that perhaps they feel very alone. And when that story comes across, whether it's through a book project, whether that's through a video, whether it's through a podcast, they have this moment in time where they recognize it's not just them, And if we can create that type of connection throughout humanity, if people can start to see themselves in the stories of others, they can also see their path through the other side. They can see that that person moved through that challenge and it become a strength. And so how can I do that and facilitate that in order for people to feel more connected? We are far more similar than we are different, but oftentimes it takes taking down those barriers in order to recognize that.
And we are our experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we talk about children specifically, I think about the children are one caring adult away from a different perspective. And we see the world through the experiences that we've currently have, right? So you and I show up to an experience, and we may experience it differently because of the lens that we view that life experience through. So the pandemic is a great amplifier for that, right? It's magnified some of the disparities that exist in the world and the access to resources or the coping strategies. Those of us that have done a lot of mindset work and a lot of self-development and really anchored into some strategies and skills that are part of the fabric of who we are able to navigate this moment differently than somebody who has lived a very anxious life or believes in scarcity or is afraid to embrace what we don't know, right? The unknown. And I always say that we operate out of love or fear. And those that gravitate towards a more fear-based approach will always will struggle to find the good in all that there is. And I am definitely a glass half full person. And I do seek the opportunity to look for evidence of that in order to keep my frame of mind in a positive light to the best of my ability.
I think that's really great. And I know some days it's probably harder than others to be the glass is half full person.
Mhm.
And I am sure in a lot of what you talked about from the way you felt in your childhood times, it was probably very hard then. Um, was there someone when you were younger going through what you were experiencing with your, parents being separate? And was there someone that you were able to talk to, um, open up to? Were you comfortable sharing those feelings that you were having?
I did have a lot of access to resources. I'm very grateful for that. I was an athlete, so I had coaches. I had other parents, other families that at the time I felt were like, I don't know how to describe it. Let's say I thought that they weren't paying attention, but like looking back now, they were doing what they knew how to do. So they didn't address it specifically, right? They didn't say, you should stay at our house for dinner tonight because it's safer here. But they did it through a loving action by inviting me to stay for dinner, right? Or a coach that said that they would give me a ride home after practice, knowing that perhaps I may or may not be waiting for a ride home, right? And the idea that there were counselors at school that would take me out of class and just check in and see how I was doing because they recognized that perhaps my affect that day had changed or I was a little quieter. As an extrovert, when you're quiet, people are concerned, right? And so this idea that maybe I was a little quieter or withdrawn in class, and one of my teachers very, in a very caring way, went to the counselor and said, hey, you might want to check on Dawn today. And then they would pull me out of class and check in with me and see how I was doing. So I was surrounded by many caring adults as a child, and I'm so grateful for them because it allowed me to know that if I needed someone to talk to, that they were available for me.
That is impressive. So going to college, you have your undergrad in psychology. How was that? Did you go away to college?
I did. I went to Towson University for undergrad. So I grew up in New Jersey, so a couple hours down the road. But yes, I wanted to go somewhere that was close enough that I could be home when I wanted to, but far enough away that was different. That was my benchmark for like where I wanted to go.
Very cool. And obviously, I would think that the psychology was driven by your desire, like you said, always being an empath and wanting to understand people and really kind of get into their heads, if you will.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. I definitely wanted to be in the helping profession of some sort. I did want to be the caring adult that could help a child. At the time, I was very drawn to like social work, psychology, sociology classes were also very interesting to me. human behavior and the why behind why people do what they do was always very intriguing to me. And then I really gravitated towards like neuroscience and the brain and kind of how imprinted are those things, right? Where is there an opportunity to change those generational patterns became very interesting to me, and still to this day is something that I focus on, the ability to change generational patterns through the actions of leading with empathy, empathic accuracy, emotional regulation, some of the things that my team teaches now.
That's awesome. I love that you're doing and following your heart and your passion and your dreams. And I say this almost now in every episode of this show, but it's so inspiring to meet all of these amazing people who the common like underbelly in a lot of these conversations is I'm following what I want to do. I'm following my dream. I did this to achieve what I thought I always wanted to do or knew I always wanted to do. And it's so inspiring. I know for me, and I'm sure other people watching, but what is something that would surprise people to know about you?
I didn't always have it all together. I think that those who have known me the longest have watched the evolution of my journey. And in 2018, I contributed to a book, and in that chapter, I shared a snapshot of my personal story, and it was called "Shifting My Identity." And I acknowledged that the way in which I grew up, and then the perfectionism that I started to connect to, and the ability to connect myself to an identity outside of myself, really made my teens and 20s a little bit rockier than perhaps it needed to be. But through that evolution and through all the lessons that came with that, I also realized that happiness is an inside job. And I learned that I needed to love myself from the inside out. And hustling for my worthiness, as Brene Brown would say, really didn't get me very far. And so the people that stayed with me and who have known me through that entire evolution will tell you that I'm a beautiful human being. I've always loved everyone. I've always been so compassionate, but I was inside struggling quite a bit. And I was pouring everything I had into the people around me, hoping that nobody would notice. And now I think, moving into my 30s and now 40s, I'm able to truly embrace and embody exactly who I am and show up fully as myself and live within my values in a way that isn't compromised any longer. And that's just such a beautiful feeling for me. But the people that meet me today would likely not believe that I didn't always show up in this, full, complete version of myself.
I love that you talk about this because I was just talking about this the other day about my own personal experience and kind of the same thing is like you have these internal struggles and you don't necessarily want to share them so you kind of put off some other alternative energy and it's until I personally had a little talk with myself. We sit down and we have a meeting with ourselves and we explain to ourselves that we are deserving of all the things that we want and that we have to be comfortable and love who we are inside in order to really be able to show that to the world and project our true selves, like you said. What was it for you? Was there like a specific moment or a turning point or just maybe something that you hit head on and just went, no, I have to be true to me. I have to let this go or let this out.
I think I actually saw it probably more times than I was willing to pay attention, right? So history repeats itself until you learn its lessons. And I repeatedly seem to find myself in relationships with narcissistic personalities. And I recognized only after doing it multiple times that I was the common denominator. Christine Hassler has a podcast called Over It and On With It. And I heard her articulate this so beautifully. And I recognized that I was this common denominator. I was attracting the same type of individual. And I needed to look within myself to see if I want to change this for myself, that I had to change myself, or recognize why I was attracting this type of individual. And so really separating myself and taking some time to myself to recognize how I was contributing to this and what that was. And it had a lot to do with my own self-love and worthiness. And so beginning to do that inner work really changed the type of people that I was attracting. And I'm very grateful now for the relationship that I'm in for almost 10 years that has really brought so much love and light to my life. But it took me recognizing that I needed to first love myself and show up as a whole person to that relationship in order to attract a whole person.
I love it. My heart was so warm right now with that story. I'm very happy for you and the journey that you've taken and where it has led you. That is amazing. You sound like you've accomplished so many things, both personally and professionally, that are so helpful to other people. And I love that. Um, you mentioned that you contributed to a book. Is there anything about that or anything else that you would like to share before I ask you our final question here?
After I contributed my story to a book called You Don't Know Our Stories From Trials to Triumph, um, I also recognize the power of sharing your story. And we did a book launch, and I was able to talk to an audience of, for otherwise strangers to me, but the lead author of the book, it was her family and friends. And I watched us transform that audience in a matter of an hour and a half by just being our vulnerable, authentic selves. And it made me want to put together another book project. So I did. In 2019, I put together a book called The Strength of Our Anchors, and I invited 9 women to share their stories of overcoming. And it was through that project that I was able to give the gift of authorship to 9 women, but also the opportunity to allow them to elevate their voices and share their stories of overcoming so that we could then be a gift to so many other people that have the ability and opportunity to read our stories.
I love that.
So that is one of my great passion projects.
That's incredible. And that goes back to exactly what the under theme of this entire conversation has been, and it's sharing the stories, getting your story out there, identifying with other people with similar stories, and feeling connected. And there's no better
Yep.
feeling than feeling connected to another person and or their story. If you were out and about, work, mall, wherever, and you had the opportunity to hold up a sign that says one thing about Dawn, what would you want people to know about you?
Oh, such a good question. My initial thought was be kind, but that's not something about me. But I would say maybe wholehearted or heart centered, because I do believe that in all of my actions, I intend to lead with my whole heart. And I hope that others will, I'll be a mirror for other people in the benefit of doing so, which invites other people to connect and hopefully allows them to feel safe in my presence with my leadership and offers them the opportunity to grow into the fullest expression of themselves.